Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm a white guy who grew up in Orange County, California.
And I'm Jerome, a black guy who grew up in Orange County but moved to Northern California. And we were high school teammates.
30 years later, Jerome and I have reconnected, and while we still consider ourselves friends, our viewpoints differ on a lot of different topics.
But what we don't differ on is that people can still get along and have civil conversations.
Even about serious and emotional topics.
Since I grew up in a white neighborhood, most of my friends were white or other races.
So I said to Jerome, hey, let's do a show about things white people say and prove to people that you can have a civil, engaging, and oftentimes educational discussion.
And most importantly, we both agree that racism isn't political. So we promised each other we would keep politics out of the show.
That's part of our plan to show everyone that these conversations can be positive.
So send us your topics.
And we'll do our best to discuss the things that you hear white guys say. So let's do this, Jerome. Things white guys say, man. We're rolling right along now, getting a lot of positive feedback, folks. If you haven't had a chance yet to check out Jerome, when Jerome and I first started, like he didn't even know how to open Zoom. And this week he launched his first YouTube, his own channel, man. He's got his own video called Time Out for Black History. Before we get started, Jerome, and instead of doing kind of a flashback moment, this show, why don't you just tell us a little bit about Time Out for Black History and what you'll be doing separate from this show, but as a complement to what we're doing?
Nice. So I thought about the historical side of what we're doing, the fact that we're trying to look for a way to make society equal. And I think it's important that we go back and we're able to kind of see why it looks the way it does. And generally, Black history has been a subject that has been, not very well taught in this country through elementary, middle school, high school. And so I thought it'd be nice to just have a site where people could go to access quick hitting, 10-minute pieces on specific moments in Black history so that they can have a good baseline for some of the things that, led to the situation our country's in today.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you're doing that. And, Jerome and I are both teachers, him at the high school level, I'm at the university level, but I said, hey, man, these are things you can use in your classroom too. So think about that now instead of later. So you don't go, oh, I wish I would have thought about that. Because that actually is something that I found to be very useful. When you record a video, if you can say, hey, I want to speak to my students, but also to a wider audience, then it's really kind of catering to all fields. So Jerome, on one of our prior shows, we talked about a term you mentioned called lawfully equal. And we really didn't want to go back too far into that, but can you just give us the 30-second explanation? Because we want to take lawfully equal and what we learned last time into what you and I want to discuss today, which is just equal opportunity, and they are different.
Okay. So lawfully equal is just the idea that things can be equal under the law, but that doesn't mean that societally things are equal. So you can have a law that says that, Blacks are given the right to vote, but that doesn't actually mean Blacks are getting the right to vote within the country. So it's important that we recognize that the law is only a small piece of it.
Okay. So, and I asked you what you wanted to talk about for this next show, and you kept coming back to opportunity and equal opportunity. So tell me, first of all, I want you to share a quick story that you shared on my last podcast, which when we did the 1-hour interview, which was the one that went viral, that kind of launched the partnership we have. Tell me the story about what happened to you when you were at the University of Hawaii.
So in class, and a professor decides that he wants to, use the N-word. He says, in this class, we'll be using historically accurate words like nigger in class. And I put my hand up and I asked him, I said, I don't know which modern war that word was used in. And he said, well, I think that maybe it wasn't, but I just wanted to make sure that the class was aware I'm going to be using terms like that. So I kind of pushed the point with him. He eventually had me escorted out of the classroom for, causing a ruckus in the room. So the following day, I returned back with about 8 of my fellow players on the basketball team, and we sat in the front row. And we just kind of, pressed the issue about why he felt that term was an acceptable term to use during class when it wasn't accurate to the subject we were talking about. And so he called campus security. So we were escorted away. Eventually, it went to the chancellor of the school. And eventually the school decided that the professor was in the wrong. We started a chapter of the NAACP in Hawaii. And, we kind of learned that our voices were strong and that we had a place to, set people straight on appropriateness.
And there was one other thing that happened while you were there, and that is a conversation you had with your father about something that happened in your life. And I think that really sets the bar for the opportunity discussion. I think you just gave a good example of how you have been impacted. And folks, I think most of you know, Jerome was raised by white parents, has an older white sister, and was one of four African American children adopted by those wonderful parents. And Jerome's still very close with them, but but for him to go away to school after going to a high school where it was mostly Caucasian and a few other minorities here in Southern California, to have that experience, to really go through something that I certainly would have never gone through because I'm Caucasian. But then the story takes kind of a different turn, but also teaches a different lesson. So Jerome, tell us about that and what happened there.
So it was my junior year in college, and I was in a relationship, and my girlfriend came and told me that she was pregnant. And I was on scholarship playing basketball. And because of that, I wasn't able to get a job because of the scholarship. And so I called my dad up on the phone and I said, "All right, Dad, I messed up." And he said, "It's one of three things. Either you're getting married, you're having a baby, or you're dropping out of school." And he said, "As long as you're not dropping out of school, you got our support." And so they proceeded to help me financially finish college, take care of my child. I brought my child home by myself eventually and raised him, the wonderful Jerome Facion Jr. But it was that opportunity that was afforded to me that allowed me to continue on the path that allowed me to be who I am today. And so I just think that the opportunities that we have are so important, and some in this country are just not afforded those opportunities.
Yeah, and Jerome and I had a very brief conversation off air that I think will kick off this opportunity discussion with being an educator and being in Southern California where there's such a strong Latino presence. I have had the opportunity over, even when I substitute taught in high school way back when, but more so as a professor at either University of Southern California, Cal State Long Beach, and now I'm at Hope International University, a Christian university in Fullerton. Um, I've had the opportunity on several occasions to talk to Latina females who are struggling in school and just re-emphasize the importance with them, the importance of the education when they've come to me frustrated, even as an advisor, because I'm an advisor. Maybe I should just get a job. And one of the things that we are sensitive to in Southern California is traditionally in the Latino homes, at least in the generation that we grew up in the 80s and 90s, oftentimes these Latino individuals, Latina in particular, are the first in their family to either go to college or be on track to graduate. And so I'm always very sensitive to that, to go, oh, you're so close, you're so close. Just so before we get into the straight opportunity discussion, I want to go back to the discussion that Jerome had with his father, who I've known since 1987, and is a great person. Who is both his parents, they value education. They're college professors. So Jerome and I kind of had this agree but disagree that, understanding the value of education is different than opportunity, but in his words, but they are the same in some ways. So I wanted to point out that this discussion is not just about opportunity, but about understanding certain values. And it's not something that just targets African American, if you will, but it's different races and everybody, and it's different. It doesn't mean one's right or wrong. It just means that things can change. And so, Jerome, address that really quickly, and then we'll get into the discussion just strictly about opportunity.
So I think that it's important for us to understand that this is generational, that what your grandfather did, what your father did, those are things that are passed on to you. To my parents, college wasn't a choice. College was something their children were going to do, and so I was raised that I was going to go to college. And part of that again comes from the choices and the opportunities that they had and the choices that their grandfather had and that their grandfather had. And so I just think that it's important that we understand that to change that trajectory, things have to change, that we have to create programs, we have to attempt to get that path and move that path in another direction, because they don't change on their own. And so that's why I just think it's really important that we begin to attack these institutionalized parts of our society that have so ingrained certain groups into certain paths.
Yeah, and I really quickly want to address too that it would be really easy for someone to say, "Oh, so Jerome's parents raised him that he had to go to college, but that in itself is unequal opportunity because college is expensive." Well, that may have been true. Yeah, even when we were in high school, you could always go to community college, and your parents didn't say you have to. In fact, you did go to community college, right?
Yeah.
It
Yep.
was no. Your future will be directed by the fact that you will go to college. And I raised my kids in the same manner, and one of them was going to go to community college. And I feel very blessed about this. But after his older brother went away to school for his freshman year and had a dorm, which the kids call an apartment in these day and age, he went, "Man, if I can go away to college, I want to do it." And that was an awesome thing because we weren't pressuring him to go away or to go to a 4 year, just that he knew he would go to college. And for a 17-year-old to have that growth, that was great. But again, the opportunity was there. So, Jerome, let's talk about opportunity. I think a lot of times as Caucasians, we like to glamorize movies like Hidden Figures, like, oh, look how great it is. There was finally an awakening of treating people with respect and dignity based on their color. And I actually haven't seen the movie. I walked through the room and my daughter and my wife were watching it, and I saw a really powerful moment. I think it was Kevin Costner who basically said, everybody's equal. But I think as Caucasians, we tend to kind of celebrate those movies and those moments like we had some great ethical moment. But you have a lot more examples of those things still happening. I mean, that movie was set in probably the 50s, I'm guessing, right? 50s, 60s, maybe
Yep.
early 70s. But we're now in 2020, heading into 2021, and there's still many examples you can give of where there is not equal opportunity. So why don't you give us some examples of that, and then we'll get into maybe how we can address those to change that.
So let me first comment on your statement about we love to take those moments, that scene in the movie when the black guy looks at the white guy and they smile at each other and we go, man, things are great.
Yeah.
There have always been the Booker T. Washingtons. There have always been the Madam C.J. Walkers, those Black people within American society who have achieved success. I mean, I think a lot of people, I remember back in 2008 when people said, we finally did it. We beat racism. Barack Obama's president. Everything's going to change now. These are moments, but it doesn't change the core of what our country has been. So when I just think of general, like, pieces of information that help me understand the disparity. And I say, all right, when you look at the average net worth of families in America, and again, poverty's poverty. I understand that argument. The average net worth of the average Black family in America is $17,000. The average net worth of the white family in America is $117,000. That's why my dad was able to send me money and help me get through college. That's why my dad was able to help me settle into my first place when I came back. It's those opportunities that were afforded to me. Now, someone might say, well, pull your bootstraps up, do it yourself. That's not what this world is about. And so I think it's important that we understand that those, and I use examples of myself because nobody can refute those. Those are truths.
Your co-host Josh Luke here, and if you like what you're hearing, then check out our not-for-profit website at timeforredemption.org. Timeforredemption.org was created so Caucasians and other races have a platform to lean into for the social justice movement. It's not political, guys. It's not even controversial. It's just human. It's a movement that provides resources, tools, whatever you might need for individuals, corporations, and communities that may not be comfortable with existing social justice organizations. So if this sounds good to you guys, check out redemption.org and just join in and do your part to end systematic and institutionalized racism. Hey, I did it, folks. You can too. Look, and Jerome, no different than how I was raised. You want to do it on your own, if you are that kind of person, but you kind of always know that mom and dad may be able to bail me out, probably can bail me out, things like that. And so I see where the discussion on opportunity comes in. Are there any examples? And you gave a great example on the last show about how your students, thought, oh yeah, that's not fair, until you're like, well, what if you're the student who gets, if there's two students, one white, one black, and they take the black one, what if you're the kid that doesn't get in? All of a sudden they change their mind, which of course that's human nature. Can you provide some more examples? Because I'm sure they've come up in your courses where you talk with a mixed race class, teaching them African American history, because I think those things really open people's eyes.
Well, I mean, it's societal. And so when we think about the example you bring up, so when I talk to my students about affirmative action, the large majority of them are in support of it. These are upper middle class, wealthy white kids generally who are in support of affirmative action because they believe in a society where everyone has equal opportunity. But when the question turns to, would you be willing to give up your spot at that college? Things change a little bit. It's like, well, no, that's not fair. I worked really hard, and so I should get a chance to get there. And so when we talk about, when you say give examples, I'll give you an example. One of the number one determining factors of whether you go to college or not is whether or not your parents went to college. That's like one of the number one determining factors. So those are advantages that are afforded. If your dad went to UC Berkeley, you got a much better opportunity to get into UC Berkeley than someone whose dad didn't go to UC Berkeley.
Sure.
At Bellarmine, if your dad went to Bellarmine and your grandfather went to Bellarmine, that legacy is huge. Nobody argues about legacy. Nobody says that's unfair.
Yeah.
That's just as unfair as affirmative action is. It's giving somebody an opportunity they haven't deserved themselves, but something else is giving them that chance. So I think it's important that if we're going to look at one and say this is unjust, we can't look at the other one and say it's just for some reason.
I kept coming back to, as we were preparing for this show, that story you shared about you and Carol walking into a store with each of your kids a few years back. Can you share that? Because I think people, one of the goals on our show, and I keep saying, hey, here's what white people are going to say to Jerome, like when you say that on the show, and Jerome always says, hey, bring it on. We'll talk about that, in a nice way. But like one of the things I was going to say today is, I think we're talking about poverty versus not poverty as opposed to race. And it's very easy to always make that argument, but it's also, Jerome's got a lot of examples of where that's not true. But share the story of you and Carol walking with your kids into the store, because it really sets a baseline for how different things are.
So, and remember, two people raised in the same home, same parents, same environment. My life experiences have showed me that getting out of that car, walking into the store, my son was about 4 or 5, her daughter was about 3. And Caitlin has her toy in her hand and Jerome has his. And I turn and say to Jerome, put the toy back in the car. He goes, Caitlin's carrying hers in. Why can't I carry mine in? I said, we don't do that. We don't carry toys into stores because when we walk out with that toy, someone's going to ask us where we got it from. And I'm not trying to. Could I explain it off? Could I have my sister vouch for me and say it's real?
Why do you have to have your sister vouch for you? Why? Because she's white?
Why should I have to? And so then what I just decide is I'm not doing it. I'm just not going to deal with it. And so, those are those small moments. Now, someone else might say, dude, just stand up to him, fight the good fight. It gets tiring.
Yeah.
It gets tiring day in and day out, fighting the good fight.
Is there ever been a better example of a teachable moment that you had to unteach 10 years later when he was mature enough to understand? Like, it was like, today, just listen to me, leave it in the car. And I went, Dad, why? I don't understand. Well, someday you will, but even today, even if I explained it to you, you won't,
Yeah, I think it was the hardest thing was for my sister to realize that that's the world that I was in. And because her, again, as a white woman, she has her own stuff being a woman, but as a black man, she went, oh my God, I didn't know that that's what it was like in your mind, And so I think it really is. These are these moments. And you said, when you made that point earlier, that poverty and race, I think it's really important that we just spend a second to understand the correlation.
Yeah, please do.
That poverty began with slavery. That poverty continued throughout the Black codes. That poverty continued throughout Jim Crow segregation. All those years, we're talking hundreds of years, where wealth was not allowed to be accumulated by a certain group of people in our country, who were just allowed to start really accumulating that wealth in the last 60 or 70 years for the most part, still with all of the weight on them from all of the repercussions of those previous years. So while I do agree that poverty is the issue, poverty and race are so closely aligned in our country that you can't separate them.
So, yeah, and I think I'm really glad you brought that up, because as I look now, I remember I was applying for a government job a few years back in healthcare or something at the VA, and it specifically said, don't put your picture on your resume, because it was a trend a few years ago to put your picture on your resume. I mean, talk about that a little bit, and how that historically has that changed? Is it something that you teach your students to do, or no?
Definitely not. I mean,
Yeah.
you can look this up. I'm not going to cite the exact numbers because I'm not sure. There was a study done about 5 years ago, and they sent out resumes, identical resumes, to multiple agencies. And the only thing different was the first name: Jamal, Luis, Bill, Ted. The people with ethnically diverse names were given callbacks like 20% of the time compared to those with names like Bill and Tim and those kind of names. And so I think that it's a, and I've told you the story about the 7-Eleven. Did I tell you, I told you that story?
I don't think so. Tell me that.
So I'm in junior college and I'm applying for a job. So I call the 7-Eleven right down the street because I spent my stipend money on stuff I shouldn't have spent my stipend money on. But so I call the 7-Eleven and I go, I'm looking for a job. And they say, oh, cool. Come down. We're right around the corner. I hang the phone up, and you can't tell what I am by my voice. I don't, I could be whatever. I come around the corner, open the door, say I'm here for an application. And they said, I'm sorry, we're not hiring. And I said, wait a minute, I just talked to you on the phone a second ago. And they went, oh, that was you? And I said, yeah. And they go, oh yeah, no, we're not hiring. I don't know who told you we were hiring. And again, it was in that moment that I went, this isn't going to be a fair world. This isn't going to be a world where I get treated the same as other people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example as well. So, Jerome, we got just a few minutes left. What else did you want to cover about opportunity that we haven't had a chance to discuss yet?
I just think that it's really important that we look outside of our own existence and we look outside of our own comfortable life that we have. I have a comfortable life, and we're able to look and see those people that don't have those opportunities and why they don't have those opportunities, and what we can do to make our society a society that is more built better to provide those opportunities to more people, especially when those opportunities are based on race because of historical institutionalized racism that's existed in our country for so long.
Yeah, and I would, just challenge folks, and I guess we're rolling into the kind of the action item portion of our show, to just ask yourself what it is that you can do in your workplace, in your home if you're a parent, in your home if you have roommates that you still don't see, understand the true uniqueness of, not uniqueness, but the true, just nature of inequality. If you are at a church, if you in any place that you notice something, go, wow, why is that still going on? Why is that perception still lingering? I would challenge you to ask yourself that. And Jerome gave, and I have no doubt that that resume test thing was as simple as you said, just by everything's the same except for the first name, I have no doubt. So, Jerome, what other, whether it's in school or what other action items can you give folks to say, hey, step back and look at opportunity, and here's how you can make a difference?
I always, and as educators, to me, it's always dive into it. Start looking at it. Start looking at the research it. Look up, does inequality exist in our country? What's that inequality based on? How has race played a role in that creation of inequality in our country? Because I think once you begin to see that these things exist, that I talked about that empathy and those things begin to roll out, and you're able to begin to attack them a little better, as opposed to making it into a fight or an argument, because that's not what this should ever be about. It's about all of us wanting better for those around us. If I could leave with one last thing, there's this great scene from I forget the comedian's name, but I use this with all of my children. It's one kid holding his bowl and his brother's next to him holding his bowl. And his brother looks over at the brother and says, "Why does he have more?" And the dad turns to him and says, "Don't ever, ever worry about whether someone has more than you. Look over and make sure that they have enough. That's all that should matter to you." And so I think that it's so important that we begin to think about the world like that we want everybody to have enough. And, and by giving opportunity, we allow people to have a chance to have enough.
I think that's a really good point. And, I mentioned to Jerome off air, just in closing, that, every single movie I see a presence of systematic, and I would actually use the more than systematic in the movies. I would use more the term historical racism, where there's I was watching a movie yesterday where the maid was African-American lady, and I was watching, I think, that show Hell on Wheels, where it was right after the Civil War, and you can go, oh, that was right after the Civil War. It's different, but it was such a strong stereotype of, oh, if you're African-American, then that's what you do. And if you're Caucasian, then that's what you do. There wasn't even an effort to say, hey, what's your skill set? What do you do? And you can still see evidence of those things in society if you really step back and look. So that's our challenge for you today, whether it's at home, whether it's at work, whether it's at church, whether it's in your community. Address it, acknowledge it, and see what you can do about it. So, Jerome, thanks for another great conversation. Folks, turn into his Time Out for Black History on YouTube. Just type in, I found it by just going to YouTube and typing in Jerome Facione Sr. Time Out for Black History. You might see a couple of our conversations there, but he's also going to have his there. So thanks so much. And Jerome, thanks again for sharing, bud.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Things White Guys Say. We encourage you to follow our show on YouTube and podcast networks, like the show, and share this episode with a friend.
And visit our website at thingswhiteguysay.com or drop us a line at info@thingswhiteguysay.com.